Hi, and welcome to Conservative Voices Talking Points. My name is David Adams, and I'd like to introduce our panelists, Gentry Collins, Eric Branstad, and Rob Mudd. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and Merry Christmas to everyone out there. Let's get started. Eric, I'm going to start with you. We've got the Build Back Better agenda fully flowing, right? The infrastructure bill was passed in both the House and Senate last month. The reports most recently are there a few $1 billion that are being allocated to the state of Iowa for roads, bridges, clean water, broadband, kind of expanding out. Can you give us sort of the Iowa take on what that's going to look like for citizens?
You know, when I was in the administration, in the Trump administration in 2017, I was on the White House infrastructure team where we had talked about and we're planning this kind of bill, this kind of piece, and we had $1 trillion was a number that we floated around and thinking that was just a complete pie in the sky number. Now this infrastructure bill that passed took, I think, a lot of some of our great ideas. We were concerned on how there was no airports had been built in the United States in decades. And just when you take in our bridges and our roads, knowing what kind of disrepair they are. Same with some of the city's sewers and transportation systems. So this $1 trillion, this $1.9 trillion that was passed, it ends up only spending, I think, 22% on actual infrastructure. So that takes it already down to where these real needs are, and they, down to about $0.5 trillion. From what I have read and I've seen as far as what Iowa gets, we've already seen recently the $120 million, 120 some odd for broadband, which, as we all know, in Iowa, connecting Iowans is been certainly needed. There's about $4 billion that will go towards the roads. There's about 400 some million towards the bridges. But that is huge numbers, certainly to Iowa and in relation to our state budget and what we currently spend on all those pieces. So I think that ultimately is good for Iowa. But the reality is that a lot of this infrastructure, what we were sold on infrastructure is not. These are pie in the sky monies for the Democrats to really blow on everything that they promised during the last campaign.
I remember reading that child care is now considered infrastructure.
They have changed the definition of infrastructure.
Changed the definition.
And they changed the definition on a lot of things to what they want.
Your ex-leader, what's the definition of is?
That's right. Changing definitions, going back a couple.
Yeah, but I know I'm done with my piece. Iowa is going to see some great monies from this, and some needed monies from this, but ultimately it still doesn't. I want to make sure that those monies go to the right places and where they're supposed to go. But ultimately, it's going to be tough, and we've seen what is happening to inflation. That same inflation certainly is going to be happening to these projects and to these numbers that we're talking about. So a lot of work yet needs to be done, and it's up to us conservatives to try to keep their feet to the fire and make sure that this money does go to what it's supposed to go towards.
Speaking of conservatives, Gentry, just as a rule of thumb, no one should take advice or seek advice on social media. Let's just make that very clear. But there's some criticisms to specifically to Governor Reynolds and other Republican governors that are receiving these funds, right? They were against pushing, to Eric's point, a bill that really 20 to 30%, somewhere in that range, actually was true infrastructure. And now that it's passed, we're receiving these funds, and then some purported people saying, well, give it back. You didn't want it in the first place. What would be your response, or a conservative response?
What a galactically stupid criticism.
Right.
We believe in the rule of law. And from time to time, we oppose new laws. If my taxes went up, I would oppose that. And yet, when the tax bill came, you pay the the tax bill, right? The idea that just because you didn't think the new law was a good law means you're not going to live by the law, that's not the way life works in America, not the way it should work in America. And I think anybody offering that criticism is probably not doing so from a place of real high integrity.
Just somewhat spiteful. Yeah.
Question, if they did give it back, because it's already been appropriated, wouldn't someone else spend it?
Good question.
Only imagine, yes.
Yeah, so-
I'm sure they would find some bats in a particular area that they could find a new home for
Yeah.
to the cost of many billions.
So that's why you keep it, right? Because you have to.
You know, one of when we were talking these infrastructure meetings at the White House when I was on the team, we had a group from Texas come to us, and they were trying to build a high-speed rail from Dallas to Houston. Doesn't that make sense? There's a ton of traffic that goes between those two big cities, the same state. Let's do it. They couldn't get it done. It was basically what it was going to take in order to try to get it done would be billions of dollars of investment and years of legal. And there happened to be some bat poop that was found on this particular route that shut it down for study and for years to come. So until we get a handle really on how to really make these things work, I've ridden high-speed rail in China. It is amazing, but knowing what I know now, and it literally cannot be done in the United States under the current system that we're in. It's just not physically, no matter how much money. It's the environmentalists will be there to stop it, and they will stop it.
How ironic, by the way.
It is.
Right? How ironic. How many cars would you be taking off the road? And yet the opposition comes from the environmental left.
Yes.
Because I don't think it's real. I don't think they really care about, they say one thing, but the reality is totally different.
You mean like 80 jets flying into a climate change?
I mean, I think they want to compromise us with all of with the Paris Accord, climate change. I believe it is the game plan to make us weak.
You know, this is a good segue. I'm going to skip ahead in a couple of our topics internally. Eric, you bring up a good point. We need to discuss unelected officials, unelected organizations, namely the IRS, CDC, EPA, OSHA. These are non-elected officials that seemingly have more power than our elected officials. Gentry, do you want to start on that and just tell us where the disconnect happened? Maybe teach us on what should be the power from an elected official. Not elected.
Extraordinary, right? That we have an administrative state that, in many respects, is the deep state. You know, the term deep state tends to have an intelligence community kind of connotation, but it's just as dangerous, maybe even more dangerous in the sort of the more pedestrian stuff that the federal government does to us. I think, I'm going to forget the page count precisely, but I think there was something like, in the last printing, 200 volumes in the Code of Federal Regulations. 200 volumes. Now, these are legal volumes, right? So like take out a dictionary and start reading it. That's a volume, okay? There are 200 volumes that govern our lives. And there are literally millions of federal employees whose job it is to manage and enforce those regulations. It is impossible, if the federal government decided to pursue you, that you have not violated at least some of them, right? It's absolutely ludicrous. And because of the way that our federal budget now works, because of the way that labor contracts work, Eric can talk to this with more recent experience, but even with the best of intentions, a new president likely cannot go and dislodge that in a term. My view is that we ought to get rid of half of the buildings and 2/3 of the employees in Washington, D.C. and replace them all with one good website, sunset that every 5 years and make Congress come back and reapprove these things. But somehow we've got to reassert our primacy as the sovereigns here. I don't mean us individually. I mean American voters have got to take control back from this thing. It's a beast.
And it affects all of, like almost every aspect of our lives. Eric mentioned, I'm assuming an EPA policy about the bat poop. I remember growing up in Pensacola, Florida, condos were planned on beachfront. They couldn't go up because of these endangered species of mice. You don't think of mice at the beach, but apparently there were, so no condos there. You know, some business people were put off or put out because of mice. I'm not saying I want to destroy mice, but I think the value of people's residences is more important than some mice.
Well, I'll give you another example that strikes a little close to home. In our family, we've got a member of the family who is beyond type 1 diabetes, right? So there's no cure for type 1 diabetes. This is not behavioral. It's not type 2. In fact, this particular patient doesn't have a pancreas. There is no way, it is not humanly possible for the diabetes to go away. Okay, and yet the federal government, in order to this is a past retirement age person. Okay, so there's no other option, right? You have to be on their health care plan, and the federal government requires that 4 times a year an endocrinologist verifies that this person is still diabetic. All right, 4 times a year. Now that's $1,000 doctor visit. Okay. Now we do that over how many millions of Americans are on healthcare programs like that? It isn't. I mean, it's just silliness. It's stupidity, right? And the idea that these people are going to make any positive impact in our lives, that they can run anything better than we can run it ourselves, it just seems pretty silly.
I think in the first show, Eric, you mentioned the department you were a part of during the Trump administration. You would have gotten rid of about half, if not a little more.
The Department of Commerce has, where I was an SES level of employee, so senior executive service, at the highest level of the department, there's 47,000 people that work in the Department of Commerce.
Just that department.
Just that department.
Wow.
And I know if 46,000 were gone, we would not see any real change to our lives. I mean, that's how deep the state has gotten. What I loved about President Trump is his common sense approach to everything. And when it makes no sense, for someone who is their diabetes outcome is not, we all know is not going to change. So that makes absolutely no sense. He took things like, and then, same thing what he did with NATO. When NATO, all the participating countries in NATO, we're paying everything, and they're not paying their fair share what we end up paying for them. He got them all to pay. It goes back to that just basic common sense, and applying common sense to government is something that he really tried to do. But as we all saw, the Washington D.C. does not like it when someone tries to mess with the giant ship that they have built, and they won't allow it to sink. So this is something that I believe if there's a new term for President Trump in 2024, now we know how to fix it. It was hard enough for us to figure out how to fix it in the first 4 years because they wouldn't let us fix it.
So what is 80,000 new IRS agents? I don't know how many they have now, but you had 80,000, and then looking at every dollar you put or take out of your checking account or savings account, what is it? They have to announce anything above 10 grand. Is that it?
I even heard 600.
That was the first proposal.
Yeah, $600.
Yeah, so they know everything. Everything.
I'm supposed to be the moderator of the show, but that one hits home. I have a problem with anyone in government that's collecting fees and the official or the organization, in this case the IRS, viewing it as revenue generating.
Right.
It's tax, and some could refer to certain taxes as just theft. I have a problem with the touting of, we're going to hire 80,000 or however many IRS agents or IRS employees, and it's going to recoup in this amount of revenue. That's our revenue. That's our income.
Right, and this is a great example of what I was talking about in terms of the size of the Code of Federal Regulations. I think if you look at the federal tax code, plus all of the relevant decisions, the case law and so forth that inform tax code, I think it's something on the order of 70,000 pages. 70,000 pages. Okay, and so now we're going to go after people that are what, have an Uber deal on the side, that are making some tips at night, that are good, honest, hardworking Americans, and we're going to have an IRS auditor, climb up their backside and throw a 70,000-page set of documents about what the tax code means at them.
And you're supposed to figure out whatever it's supposed to mean.
Unreal. It reminds me, Donald Rumsfeld before his death was famous for every year, instead of signing his tax return, he would send a letter saying, I cannot verify that this is all true and accurate because I can't possibly understand what's in 70,000 pages of tax code. Maybe when you're Secretary of Defense you can get away with that. The rest of us probably ought not try it.
Probably.
But this is an outrageous invasion of our privacy and of our sovereignty.
And if that happens, they're never going away, right? When was the last time you ever heard of the government cutting down headcount?
Once it becomes statute, it's hard to. They would throw the statute books at me whenever we tried to do anything. Well, you can't do this.
If I didn't have to live under the consequences, I'd almost be rooting for doubling that number. And the reason is that the times that we have run fastest away from the stupidity of the Democratic Party is when we had to live under their BS. And this is one of those examples that I think will burn their house down. So if we're going to have to live through it, let's make it as harsh as it can possibly be, and show the American people how stupid it is to vote for a Democrat in this country.
Agree.
Amen.
I wholeheartedly agree.
So I'm going to throw a topic at you that we didn't discuss beforehand. I'm not trying to, go off script here, but something that concerns me as we're seeing things just seemingly crumble, right? Everything that the policies that come out from the Democratic Party right now are just bad. How else you describe them? Bad.
And bad faith.
Bad faith, bad policy, bad results, bad future. No matter what you're looking at, financially, power, our stability, our grandchildren from now. Question for you all is, do you think that they care at this point, or is it just a mad rush for the next, at this point, 12 months, 11 months till the next election, to just cram in what they can get? And the reason I'm asking this is because like you just mentioned, once it's policy or once it's put in place, what do we ever pull out? You can change up executive orders, you can change up things here and there, as we've seen the first couple of days of Biden's presidency. But when it's put in place, passed as a law, do you ever take away from an agency? Do you ever take away?
No.
I don't think we've seen that, have we? Can that happen? That's a fear of mine, is that
Budget,
once
I
it's in
suppose.
place, no matter who's in power, we're not going to see it go away.
As a practical matter, that's right. Theoretically, the Congress and the president could pass a law that says we're wiping the slate clean and starting over. The chances that's going to happen are slim to none. Yeah.
I don't think the Democratic Party is a party. I think they're organized crime. Some would laugh at that, but the things that they're talking about are intellectually unsound. You can't have an argument with these folks. If you can't agree that on how you're going to have an argument or what is real and what isn't real, how do you manage with these people? How do you get anything achieved? I think they're criminal. I think they're a criminal party. I think that they take on the tactics of the mob. They're bullies, and they just listen to them, how they talk, what they want to have done, get rid of the police. I don't know how long the Republicans have to squabble among themselves before they say, hey, we're under attack. And we're under attack by those guys. Why? Because of everything that they're saying they want to do, everything they've done. So I believe it. I think that they are organized crime.
Yeah. We talked about in the last show, there just seems to be no more middle ground between, at least on some policies, some moral compasses, if you want to call them that. And I think that's what you're alluding to, right? There's a stark difference between what America has been for a couple hundred years plus and where it seems to be going, and it's based on party divide.
But it's not even that it just so happens to be different. It's planned. It's their playbook, right? This Black Lives Matter stuff. It doesn't jive with being resolute. Look, the Rosenhausen thing, or I can't even pronounce the kid's name, up in Wisconsin, Rittenhouse. I mean, that was a joke. That's complete fabrication, and the media gets a hold of it. And you would have, if you're on the East Coast, you're hearing the news, you think this kid took a gun over state lines, went up there to shoot people. Well, that's not what happened. Absolutely not what happened at all. So why do they come up with this false narrative? Because that is their game plan. They're the enemy. I think they're compromised, and I think they are not at the benefit of the United States of America. They're not for the people. They're against the people, and they want to hold us hostage to their ideals, which aren't ideals as much as they're just rules.
So give me an answer as to what conservatives do right now in response.
Stand up to it and call it what it is. I believe so. I mean, people don't stand up for anything anymore. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, and that's what happens. And I get tired of the Republican people we send to office, right? You gotta be able to say, I'm ready to fight. You gotta be able to say, I'm gonna fight, and whatever happens, happens, but it's the right thing to do. And that's where we're going. I don't see this thing going anywhere else but spinning out of control, because their rhetoric makes it go nowhere else, right? Inflation, what's going to happen with that? They don't even understand economics. If you print more money into the system and there's fewer goods available, what happens? It goes up. To me, I don't know what you guys think, but I mean.
Well, we've heard them talk about their math. I mean, Eric or Gentry or Rob, any of you, how does adding $1.9 trillion to these programs, infrastructure, social service programs, whatever you want, how does that continue to equal $0 added to a deficit? Even when their own, the OMB, the Office of Budget Man, OBM, they come out and say, no, it's going to add X. And they say, well, they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. It costs nothing and it doesn't drive inflation. Then it must not be doing anything at all. So abandon the plan. On the inflation point, Rob, I think that the printing of money is the easiest piece of that to understand. Our Democratic friends apparently don't understand it. But
I don't even think they're our friends.
Well, I'm being.
I know you are.
But they and I suspect that they do understand it and aren't willing to tell the truth about it. To be clear, but that's the easiest piece to understand. I think the piece that you alluded to, which is right and probably underreported, is that the other component. I mean, this is a basic supply and demand question. The supply of money is going up. The supply of stuff is going down. And people like to say, well, that's COVID related, but the reality is that the policies of this Democratic Party and this administration are making them worse.
Absolutely.
Right? I'll give you two quick examples, and there are thousands of examples like it. Okay, we've got these ships sitting in the Pacific Ocean. Why? Because we don't have enough truckers to deliver goods around the country, right? So I think last I knew it was something like 36 container ships, right, full of trucks worth of stuff to deliver. We don't have enough truck drivers. We've got a couple of major trucking companies based here in Iowa. As Eric knows, in fact, I think Eric may have had this conversation firsthand, that the proposed vaccine mandate threatened to reduce their driver count by 50% or thereabouts, right? 50%. The administration care? No, they didn't care at all. For people who were going to do what? Sit in the cab of their truck alone and deliver goods around the country, okay? One might say, well, the courts are going to take care of that. It looks like in the courts maybe this is moving the right way. Okay, you know what else the Biden administration, Pete Buttigieg and his crew are doing to the trucking industry? They're saying that as of, I think, February 1st of next year, that these big trucking companies that have stellar safety records, by the way, can no longer do their own training. So we're going to have to take guys that have been driving trucks for years or decades, and if they want to change jobs, they're going to have to go to an accredited institution and stand in line and pay the fees. And so these policies, to solve problems that aren't problems, to pay off big, union contributors to their campaign, are making the supply chain problem worse.
Don't you
that's
find
not
it
COVID? That's bad policy.
So the biggest port in the country is in Long Beach. Well, that's also Gavin Newsom's territory. To your point, I think he's got those guys out there. He's loaded up
they have so many regulations and restrictions there that it makes it so they can't do the job.
They can't do
that
anything.
They can't do the work. In fact, I was on the phone yesterday with a good friend. We turned in a proposal last year for a building and a project, and that proposal was $16 million. Okay? We've been it didn't get done this last year, so we were asked again to bid this project. It's now $23 million. Nothing has changed with the project. Nothing has changed with the building. That's how much more it's going to cost
Nearly
for this
50% increase.
for the same project. That's how much more it's going to cost. This is in Des Moines, Iowa. This isn't in Washington D.C. or California. This is Des Moines, Iowa, on the real cost of to get something like this done. And it's something Iowa needs. I can't talk about what it is, but I mean that's what has happened over the course of the last year between these kind of regulations, this kind of strain on the supply chain, and truly what inflation has cost us.
Let's move on to something that, Rob, you mentioned something about being willing to fight. There's a fight looming, and it's in the Supreme Court right now about the Mississippi abortion law, right, that they're ruling on. They kind of put off the Texas abortion law and said they might hear arguments for it down the road. Right now it's about Mississippi. It's probably not getting the kind of coverage in media that it should, but that's because we've got other things like you have been talking about, supply chain issues, trillions of dollars in spending, other agencies with power. But this is something that is going to hit home in each state. And I put it that way specifically. Gentry, could you elaborate on what the ruling could mean if in favor, which it looks like it'll be in favor of Mississippi, and what that means for Iowa, maybe nationally with each state?
There's a lot to unpack here, and I think it's probably worth saying at the outset that nobody's crystal ball has been very good with respect to what the Supreme Court would do, and I think that conservatives especially have been let down by justices over the years on decisions that should have been pretty obvious. I think Chief Justice Roberts is a classic example of that. So we'll see. I don't think we had to count our chickens before they're hatched. The other, I think, bit of uncertainty is how far the court. Let's say that there is a pro-life ruling. Okay, I think there are among real observers of the Supreme Court, there's disagreement about what that could mean. How far do they want to go? Do they overturn Roe v. Wade? My understanding is there's some reticence even among very conservative justices about just flat out overturning. Do they redefine viability? I mean, my understanding is that one of the things that could happen is that now there's a medical consensus that a 15-week-old fetus can feel pain. So do you redefine viability down to the 15-week level?
Not according to Feinstein. She says that's not a real human being.
I said science.
That's right. That's right.
Party.
Well, they talk that they are the party of science, right?
Right.
So, so maybe she has a different type of science.
You're right, though. The viability line has been discussed over last week and this. That's an important point of when is I hate to call it a fetus, but I'll call it a baby. When is a baby viable?
Yeah, right. And so, look, let me try to separate a little bit of analysis from my preference. My preference is that we get rid of all of it. Okay, I think life begins at conception. That's my preference. I think the analysis of people that are watching the Supreme Court may be a little different, which is to say that even if you left some of the structure of Roe v. Wade in place, but redefined when viability happens, and let's we talked, I think, last time about are there any compromises to be made, and I think my answer to that is probably no for a variety of reasons, but even if you were in favor of keeping Roe v. Wade in place, the idea that medicine and our medical understanding of human development has not changed since Roe v. Wade was announced in January of 1973 is pretty silly claim, right? So even at a minimum, I think we ought to expect some adjustment in what the legal standard for viability is. And that could be a big, just that, not enough, I'm not claiming it's enough, but that in and of itself could be a huge win for the pro-life movement in the United States.
But isn't there talk that the Roe v. Wade was the decision was not the correct decision because it wasn't the decision of the Supreme Court to make? It should be pushed on the states. And there are certain people that say, well, even though it shouldn't have been, we should let it fly.
I think the language, if I remember, it's been some years since I've read it, but the language in the Roe v. Wade decision, and setting aside the life question, okay, and just thinking about form of government now, was it appropriate for the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court's role is not to say whether abortion is legal.
Correct.
The Supreme Court's role is to say whether a piece of legislation is constitutional.
Correct. Yep.
And I think the phrase that they had to resort to was, yeah, we couldn't find this right in the Constitution. It's not expressed.
It's not there.
I think the phrase was, but it's suggested in the penumbras of the Constitution. Well, I don't know, whatever the hell that means. So no, it wasn't rightly decided. And by the way, if you were a high integrity person that happened to be a pro-choicer, you still ought to acknowledge that even if you're rooting for abortion to be legal in this country, this is a dangerous decision because they usurped the authority that is vested in voters and people and legislatures and Congresses and took it on to themselves.
Yeah.
Absolutely should be thrown out. And that's why I say I'm rooting for it to be thrown out. But I'm not sure that I assess that it will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, but if the Supreme Court can't choose which laws they want to support and which ones they want to
not legitimately down, they can't.
And that's where you get into the slippery slope, which we're there right now.
Yeah, we are.
So let's talk about what you just touched on, the authority of states versus the federal authority, federal government authority, right? The way the Constitution was written, at least in Amendment 10, I'll read it for our audience. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. This very clearly states that the state of Mississippi, in this case, runs the state of Mississippi, not the federal government. So again, as a moderator, I almost have a problem that this case went to your point. Hopefully it just gets dismissed.
We have, you know, it is a terrible misnomer and a terrible, misrepresentation that we teach in our schools that we have a democracy. We have a republic.
A republic.
Okay? And the form of government is a republic. That the power resides with the states. Okay, and that if power is not delegated to the federal government, it is not appropriately exercised by the federal governments. Now we've gotten that backwards in modern life, at least in practice. Okay, but then to this point about the appropriate role of the Supreme Court, in a republic, one of the big distinguishing differences between a republic and a pure democracy is that in a democracy, if we wanted to take Rob's car, the three of us would have a vote and we would say, let's take Rob's car.
Majority rules.
In a republic, the Constitution prohibits that. It protects the rights of minorities. That is the role of the Supreme Court. And so if there was something that was violated in the text of the Constitution as originally intended, then that would have been an appropriate intervention by the Supreme Court. But that's not what happened. No. And we've got this thing all kinds of backwards.
So, Eric, what can Iowans do to teach their children, teach their grandchildren about the rights within the state of Iowa, as opposed to, don't get me wrong, I love being a part of the United States of America, but that's just it. We're united individual states, right? So as an Iowan, what should be taught? And maybe that's too broad of a question, because then you bring in schools, you bring in counseling, you bring in all kinds of things. But bottom line, to Gentry's point, what should we be teaching our kids?
Well, I was very fortunate to have gone to a school where I really, and to grow up, with knowing, how state government works, and having those government classes in both middle school and high school that taught me exactly how it works. Well, with the internet and what we have we have going on right now, and especially with the divide with the parties and the anger that is out there, you see a lot of this. We talked about it earlier. We don't even know what they are changing the definition every day on all kinds of different things.
And why can they change the definitions? Because we let them.
Because
let 'em.
we let them, and now that mainstream media has gotten behind them, corporate America has gotten behind them. This makes it a much harder nut to crack.
Today's CEOs are demagogues.
And
They're not CEOs.
I never thought looking back 20 years ago when I would have never have imagined that this would be happening.
Can you imagine,
I really wouldn't.
Former GE CEO Jack Welch, right? Can you imagine him trying to state something that Americans should abide by, right? That I don't think that would ever cross his mind. I mean, he's a wealthy, powerful man, but and tell you where to buy light bulbs, but he's not going to tell you how to live your life and how to teach your children, right? The difference between, to Rob's point and what Eric's saying as well, CEOs now take it upon themselves that their employees have to think a certain way, and if they don't, they need to be out. Your consumers have to think a certain way, or just don't shop here, don't eat here.
And yet the irony is that the Biden administration right now today is actively considering, in fact proposing, advancing a plan that would say that religious schools, Catholic schools, Jewish schools, other religious schools that ask that their own employees abide by their faith, teach their faith, are not going to be eligible for federal funding. And I think that kind of hypocrisy is exactly what drives people in this country crazy.
Biden, a purported Catholic, right?
Yeah, nominal Catholic.
Sure.
Right.
So rules for thee, not for me. You have to abide by it.
Right. We've been talking about this for many episodes. I think, and it's why the changing of language is so important.
Yeah,
Because we live in a country defined by the rule of law. We're not governed by our betters. We're not governed by a king. We're not governed by the whims of Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Donald Trump, for that matter.
Yep.
Or George W. Bush or whoever you want to pick on. We're governed by the rule of law. And when you debase that, then the one society, the one experiment in the way we relate to one another that actually has lifted people up in all of human history goes away.
It goes what?
I'm going to bring up another topic here. I don't want to make light of it, although we could. The vice president seems to be losing staff at a record rate. Kamala Harris can't seem to keep key figures of her administration in place. And there have been some leaks, some complaints, some unnamed sources. So we can all have a good laugh about it, and maybe we should. But the accusation is that she is unprepared, whether that be for discussions, talking points, interviews, debates, or even just from a podium. Rob, I'm going to give you first go at this. Kamala Harris staff just dropping away.
Well, I think they don't want to be associated with Kamala Harris after this thing all burns down and they have a career that they want to keep going. I mean, she's completely over her head. She doesn't have the capability to do the job. She runs from the job. I haven't seen her. You haven't seen her. She's not on television. She's not doing anything on the border. She's inept, completely 100% inept. So it doesn't surprise me. Who else is going to leave? Probably all of them, and it's going to rotate through. I mean, her approval rating is at what, 28%, 20%? That's the majority doesn't like her because she doesn't do anything.
Eric, does this sort of mirror where she was in the primaries when she was running for
Go back and look at the stories written about her staff in the Iowa caucus and her early states. I think basically New Hampshire and Iowa. I don't remember reading about her South Carolina team, but your New Hampshire, Iowa team, similar type things happen then. So it's certainly it is not surprising, and I think as I've managed staffs and managed teams, it's always been very important for me to give them purpose and ownership and motivate. And I've had really bad bosses that haven't done that, and I have gotten out as quickly as possible, and that's certainly what we're seeing. One of the things that I saw yesterday was an interview with the president of Guatemala.
Huh. I saw him
And
just the other day in
That's what
D.C.
you were saying. The president of Guatemala was asked, what has since Vice President Harris's visit to Guatemala to solve the root causes of the immigration problem. What has the outreach been like since that trip? Nothing.
Nothing.
No call, no staff calls, no working together here on these root causes for these root problems. I mean, I guess I thought something was being done on the root causes because that's what they said that they were doing, but nothing.
Are you
Nothing
telling me
has
the
been
child
done.
actors didn't come up with some sort of policy?
And then, I mean, you've seen just repeatedly a White House and an administration, and certainly the Vice President's office, that has gotten nothing done. And they love the pomp and circumstance. They love the parties. They love the houses. They love all that stuff.
It's all
but
theater.
But
It's all theater.
when it comes down to actually getting stuff done, they're not getting it done. We're seeing the results. We're seeing their poll numbers. It's because they're really not getting anything done.
How did she get there? How did she get to the Senate? Wasn't she appointed? Did she actually run for the seat out of California and win? I don't think she did. I think she's appointed.
I don't have
back
that on
when
me.
Obama.
I know she was Secretary of State in the state of Iowa.
No,
State of California. excuse me.
Yeah, I think there was. It was Feinstein, and who was the other gal that was the?
I don't recall.
So, if we're right, or I think my memory serves me correctly, she was appointed. She didn't run for anything, and so how can you expect her to know what she's doing when she was never won an election? Now, I don't know if that's. I shouldn't say that because I'm not 100%.
Well, we can
look it up.
We'll Google it, or the viewers will Google it.
So, Gentry, I've got a question for you. As an American, I personally disagree with Biden's policies, but I would never wish ill will or harm on him. But we have someone that if something happened to the President of the United States, Kamala Harris is next in line. She is the president at that point.
Right.
Talk about a little bit of the fear of someone who seems to be inept, seems to be just not with it. Her staff has purportedly just claimed that she is totally unprepared for the job she has now, that is, however close you want to say, but close to being the leader of the free world.
I think that the Iowa caucuses, which may sound like a funny place to start answering that question, I think the Iowa caucuses have a unique value in American politics. And that is that during the caucuses, these aren't millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of TV campaigns where you read a script and you put the images on the screen you like. That's how campaigns are run nationwide. It's how campaigns are run in California and maybe Texas and Florida, the big states where we don't expect to know our candidates personally. In Iowa, and particularly for a presidential campaign, we still expect to meet a candidate, right? We expect to see that candidate, and frankly, committed caucus goers in both parties expect to see candidates multiple times, right? The old joke is, a pollster asks an Iowa caucus goer, who are you going to support in the caucuses? And the answer is, well, I don't know. I've only met him each 4 times, right? There's a real contribution that we make to the national political discourse that Iowans take that very seriously. You know what caucus goers' conclusion was after having that experience with Kamala Harris? Their conclusion was that she shouldn't even be on the stage. She shouldn't even be on the stage. She didn't make it through the early state process before a presidential campaign was over. And you know why? Because if it's not a camera that's turned on and a script that's being read, there's no substance there. Iowa caucus voters, Democratic caucus voters, saw it, they knew it, and they flushed her right out of the race.
So this deal I was at in D.C. this week, it was a parliamentarian, global parliamentarian national security forum. And they were talking about all the troubles around the world that affect the EU, Central America, South America, Africa. And there was a woman there from the Ukraine, and she got up to speak, and she is telling us, which she's right, of course, there's 175,000 Russian troops on their border getting ready to invade. And she says it's going to happen next month. So imagine if something were to happen to Biden. You've got the Russians that are going to attack. Why? Because Biden gave them what Putin didn't have, money. So when we turned off the spigot of oil, his barrel went to $100 or $80 or $85, which gives him the money to put those troops on the border, right? So he's going to attack. If Kamala got in office, you would see the Chinese roll over Taiwan, which they'll probably do anyway. It's a mess. It's a very scary time to be in America, to be on this planet, because of the actors that we have in powerful places.
And with all of that going on just this week, our president had a Zoom call with Putin, a 2-hour-long Zoom call reportedly, but we don't know what it was all about. He said he drew a red line, or at least his administration said a red line was drawn. Again, we don't know what that is. We can imagine what it might be, economic sanctions and whatnot. But let me ask this question to you all. The rest of the world is watching this, right? We've got evidenced weakness in the last, call it just shy of a year in America as far as American leadership. We've got turmoil within our border, people flooding over the border. It just seems like this perfect storm. The rest of the world's watching. So yes, our eyes are on Putin and the surrounding of Ukraine right now, but what about China? And what about other countries in Europe? What about all of these people that are watching?
North
I hate
Korea,
to say this.
Iran.
Exactly. They're actively watching. It's almost like you're watching the stock exchange and you see the numbers fluctuate. You're watching American power, the number just go down, 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 down. And I hate to see that. I hate to even say that, but I can't imagine that the Zoom call that our leader, that our president had with Putin is going to result in Putin backing off.
No,
on
no
anything.
way.
You know, when Biden was vice president, he and President Obama drew a red line on the Syrian use of weapons of mass destruction against Syrian citizens. And they watched Assad, as I recall, cross that red line, flaunt that, and what did they do? Nothing.
Nothing.
So, you know, I imagine what Putin's response is to, like, you know, here's this old man who drew a red line once, and a weak state like Syria with a two-bit dictator like Assad ran right over him.
What did he
What do you
take
think
when
Putin is
Obama
gonna
was
do?
in office? Crimea, right? He took it. And he's going to take Ukraine, and then he's going to take Georgia. And Putin believes that the biggest atrocity in the 20th century is the falling apart of the USSR. He wants to bring it back. He wants to reestablish the land that they lost and get it back. These folks at this conference has that everyone, to the man, to the woman, said the biggest threat is China, which they are, right? In Europe, South America, they're colonizing Africa.
But hey, we're not sending diplomats to the Olympics, you know?
Yeah, right.
So there's a show of force.
We used to be strong. We used to be the leader, and we're not. And soon we're not going to be. We're not going to be the economic power that we have been in our lifetimes. We will be second. We'll be second to China, and I mean it's coming sooner than later.
And the free world that was there, they expect us to lead. They want us to lead. They want our help. They gave speeches of, hey, we're your best ally. Come help us. You've got NATO, and then you got the EU, right? They're two different things, but you got Russia where they are. You got the pipeline that Biden gave them, and they can steamroll Europe, right through Europe if they wanted to.
what I'm
Merkel,
reading.
she lost. There's a new power change in Germany.
Yeah, from what I'm reading, Germany is there's no way
They're neutered.
Ukraine's going to join NATO, and that presents a host of problems. And so I'm not sure what leverage we have outside of economic sanctions, and if Russia has enough money, sanctions may
The only
not
thing
be as
is
much as
funny
they would.
that Ukraine, that was where Biden had this problem with his son being on all these boards. And now that he gives the money to Putin in the form of oil, by us not pumping any, that makes his value go up. And the first thing they're going to do is take Ukraine. Think what you will, but I think, I truly believe, just from traveling lists, that we are, or the Biden administration and the Democrats are not what the Democratic Party used to be.
Yeah.
And they've been compromised, and they are against anti-America, they're anti-democracy, and they want to bring in socialism that turns into Marxism, that turns into a dictatorship, one tyrant rule. I believe it. I really do.
Well, let's not end the show on that note.
Oh, I don't think, but I think you got to be aware of it. No one
You're
talks
exactly
about
right.
it. And if you don't talk about it, it shows up. Oh, no, what happened to us? Well, what happened to us is that for the past 25 years, Soros is putting people in place to make it so our society falls apart. And you look at every big city, Democratic held city, they got problems. I lived in Chicago for 18 years. I could never imagine Michigan Avenue, someone knocking down the glass windows and going in and robbing places. I mean, that would never happen. But it happens now in Democratic cities, San Francisco, Chicago, New York. And nothing happens.
Yeah.
It's dangerous, very dangerous.
It is dangerous. We certainly need to see some law and order, to your point. We live by a set of rules, and we need to see that. Gentlemen, we're going to call it a show, but I'm going to give you, just like we do each show, the last remarks, the closing remarks. And Rob, we'll start with you as we always do.
Vigilance, people. I'm telling you, we are in a time where we have to understand where how we were founded, where our ancestors, meaning the Constitution and the wars what they fought. We're there again. We're absolutely there. And if we don't believe it, if you don't believe it, I'm here to tell you it's true. And you got to vote Republican. You got to get involved. You cannot vote for these Democrats because they will sell us out. Your kids won't be safe. Your generational kids won't be safe. We will be under the rule of what, I don't even know, but it won't be what it is today. So sorry to end it on a tough note, but it's reality.
Eric?
Similar, but different point. We need to do more now than what we have ever done before. And what do I mean by that? We need to, whether it's work harder, whether it's give more money, whether it's volunteer more, whether it's finding the right leaders, whatever it's going to take, we've got to do more than what we've ever done before, because we've talked today about what is at risk if we don't do that. So we've got to do it better. We've got to do it cleaner. We've got to do it bigger. We've got to do all of it. But we've got to do more than what we've ever done before in order to be successful. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to ask I'm going to recruit you guys to do the same, because we've got to do it. We know what's at risk. We've talked about it today.
Gentry.
You know, it's nearly Christmas time as we record this, and I think one of the greatest Christmas gifts that the Democrats can give us is to behave like Democrats.
Yeah.
You know, the last time that Joe Biden was part of the White House team and Nancy Pelosi was Speaker and Chuck Schumer was helping run the Senate, that next year, that next midterm election, we netted more than 60 new Republican seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. We took that majority back just 2 years after Time Magazine said the Republican Party is dead forever, and it was their behavior, as ugly as it was. You know, the greatest gift that they can give us is that they can behave like Democrats, and they're doing that today. I think, and it's a point I've made on this program before, and I'll make it again and again and again because I think it's really important. I don't think we ought to let their bad behavior define our behavior. Mm-hmm. You know, the difference between them and us is that we have a set of ideas that actually lift people up. And I think that in a time when Democrats are showing their true colors, when they're burning the country down in many important ways, I think that's an opportunity for us to step up and say, look what we can do, and not just settle for not being them. Not being them is enough to win some elections this time around. Okay, I grant you, but let's step forward, and I think we can do that in Iowa. We'll maybe talk about it on another show. But you know, we now have Iowa conservative leaders stepping up to say things like, hey, you know what? We have a $2 billion surplus in the state. You know, we've got a workforce development problem all over the country. The coasts are burning down because of these stupid Democratic policies. So let's make Iowa even more competitive. Let's get rid of the state income tax. Is that right? That's Republican leadership in the state Senate proposing that right now as we think about a new session. I think that is a great starting point for the new year. I think we ought to be saying it's not enough to just not be them. We got a great set of ideas that can build this country, that can put us back on top, and let's go put those on showcase. Yep. I think we win.
Perfect. Well, gentlemen, Merry Christmas. Hope you have a happy
Merry
holiday,
Christmas to you.
happy New Year. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching Conservative Voices Talking Points. Hope you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year as well. We'll see you next time.